Good morning, everybody. My name is Terry Smith. I'm the manager of the Retail Consumer and Online team in Enterprise Ireland, responsible for the online retail scheme. You're all very welcome here this morning. I'm also joined by my colleague Paul Kaplis, who is the grants claim manager for this scheme and who is our main speaker this morning. Good morning, Paul.
Morning, everyone.
And supporting us today as well as Anne-Marie Coogan from the online retail team. So Anne-Marie, ready with the next slide, which we'll do a walkthrough of the running order for this morning. So firstly, I'll give an overview of the online retail scheme to date. Then I'll take you through a recap of the fundamentals of the scheme and to refresh your memory of what you've applied for. I then hand over to Paul, who will take you through the documentation that you need to submit when making a claim for this grant. And most important thing to take away from today is that you can revisit this webinar when the time comes to complete the paperwork and submit your claim. We will then have a Q&A, and hopefully we'll have this finished around 11:45. Just before I start, just to let you all know that we'll be recording this webinar and we will go up live on our grants claims website in a day or two for those people who can't attend today's session. But we do require all participants or all recipients of the grant to view the webinar and to notify us that if they're not here today, to notify us that they have viewed the webinar. Anne-Marie will share the link in terms of the grant claim forms. I don't think we're in a position to put it in the chat, but we will ensure that will be shared with you. So if you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A box. The chat is disabled, so your questions will go into the Q&A box today. So we'll answer as many questions as we can. There may be some questions that are quite specific to your company. So if I think a question is quite specific to a particular case, I'll pick up on that question after the webinar. So we note your name and we'll contact you separately. Okay, so I'm just going to go off camera for the presentation, just a few other points to make to you. Overall, not to worry if there appears to be a lot of information today. It can be a lot to take in, particularly for anyone who is a new recipient and maybe hasn't had the grant before. We just want to have you informed, to have an overview of the process, to be aware of where to find documentation, and you can revisit this webinar at any time if you need it. We're conscious that many of you today may not have received any state support in the past, or maybe this is your first application to the scheme. So really it's to help support you be familiar with the steps and processes involved in claiming your grant. So the easiest way to describe the process is that you carry out the work with your provider, your consultant, you incur your costs with your internal champion. The external provider, will send you an invoice, you pay them. Then you submit the claim and reimburse you for eligible expenditure that you spent. And Paul will go through this in more detail later. So the official legal letters of offer have been issued and everyone should have their offer at this point. If anyone hasn't received it, just to note that it has gone to the directors in the company, and Anne-Marie on the team, Anne-Marie Coogan, will be following up then once we get notification that the DocuSigns of the letters of offer are signed. She will be contacting the directors just to confirm it is them that signs the letter of offer as well. And a key point this morning is that we have an extension to the final claim date. So on the original website and at the application stage, the proposal was that the end date, final claim date, would be Friday the 3rd of November this year, 2023. That has been extended by 2 weeks. So we're mindful that there was a delay in getting the letters of offer out. So we have given 2-week extension to the 17th of November as the final claim date. And there is a single claim. So, realistically, you should try get your projects complete and paid for in advance of the claim. That's the final claim date and not necessarily the final date to incur costs. I mean, if you can manage to incur the costs and get the paid and claim in the same day, you're doing very well. So I'd advise people, if they've started their project already and, they could have started from the 3rd of May. In some cases, some people may have started later. But as soon as all your expenditure is incurred and paid for, you know, get your claim in as early as possible. Maybe just don't leave it until the last minute, unless you need that full time to get the project done. Okay, so over to the next slide, Anne-Marie. Great. So I'm going to talk through the scheme objectives. So just again, a refresher that the scheme itself responds to a need identified by the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment to develop Irish retailers' online capability in order to sustain the sector through the pandemic and recovery. So the scheme has been running since 2018 and it's designed to achieve a step change in your existing online presence and build capability in the company around the digital online presence. So the objective overall is to support the retail sector to develop a more competitive online offering. And this will help you to compete both domestically and potentially internationally as well. Next slide, Anne-Marie. So, you know, a lot of this information was available obviously at the application stage. And I'd, asked you all just to refamiliarize yourselves as well with what was in your own application form as well. And, you know, the letter of offer that has come through to the directors, be sure to read the letter of offer. There's a lot of good information there. And in particular, the costs that were deemed eligible. So in some cases, your costs may have been disallowed or reduced. For example, if you applied for, you know, costs that weren't eligible, or if, for example, the number of days you had applied for a particular task, maybe it was deemed to be excessive for the task in question. There are some incidents where, you know, costs were disallowed or certain ineligible costs were disallowed. So just be aware of that from reading your letter of offer. It would also have been notified to you in the original email that went through on the 18th of August as well, in terms of outlining your approval. So familiarise yourself with the details in the letter of offer. So the two cost categories, internal champion and also the external service provider or consultancy, as it's referred to in the application, the letter of offer. The funding must be used to introduce what we call additional functionality to your existing online presence. It can also be used for in-house training on e-commerce or e-marketing type activities, but basically it's additional functionality. So not routine day-to-day, maybe tasks that you would be doing normally anyway. Fundamentally, the funding is to address e-commerce capability development and not to subvent day-to-day costs. So just be mindful of that. And please note also that ineligible costs in the following slide, as we won't cover these if they're contained in your grant claim. So move on to the next slide, Anne-Marie, please. Okay, so this is just a recap, and all this information was on the original webpage as well. But it's just a reminder, a refresher for anyone maybe that hasn't been through the scheme before. So I'll just talk them through quickly. So any upgrades to existing online channels that would happen anyway or could be considered business as usual, you know, wouldn't be deemed eligible. The purchase of hardware, so laptops, studio equipment, cameras, etc., leasing of vehicles, those kind of costs are not eligible. Purchase of off-the-shelf software packages, licenses or subscriptions, for example, for customer relationship management, CRM systems, Shopify monthly subscription fees, those types of costs are not eligible. The funding of online advertising campaigns, such as pay-per-click or banner ad campaigns, good for Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. So any advertising campaigns, not an eligible cost. Offline marketing costs, such as, you know, creation of brochures, the printing of brochures, materials for events, etc. Video production and photography costs are not eligible. External training course fees are not eligible unless they're provided in-house by your chosen consultancy firm or external service provider. And these are typically would have been detailed in your application form. So, you know, if it's detailed in your application form with your selected consultant, that's fine. If it's something external to that, you know, it wasn't in the application form, it wasn't approved, we can't allow those costs. So any expenditure that's incurred and paid for prior to the call close date or after the final grant claim date is not eligible for support either. So just be mindful of those dates again. So any costs incurred from the 3rd of May is okay. That was the call close date. Up to the 17th of November 2023. But just bearing in mind, the 17th of November is the date the actual claim needs to come in. So realistically, your costs should be incurred maybe a little bit prior to that, and evidence of payment, etc. So just to note that the reason that we don't cover some of these is that, it's really to maximize the online skills building. There are other costs that we can't include that aren't typically eligible, but the objective is to upskill within the business and bring in that expertise to support upskilling. Okay, so you will note in your letter of offer the details of the eligible costs, which could be in either of the two categories. So you will have the internal champion salary costs and the consultancy or external service provider costs. In some cases, the application was not approved for the full amount, as I stated earlier. So just, can't stress that point enough. Just make sure that you're clear what's in the letter of offer and also clear what was in the original application. If you include ineligible costs in your claim, they will be deducted from the amount of grant you will receive. And with such a tight time frame, up to the 17th of November, we get a high volume of claims in at the same time. You're best to stick to the what was approved, and don't just put invoices in that you're not sure about. If you're not sure, try to contact us in advance. And that, please note as well, in terms of external service provider costs, it's in the net costs that are claimed for and the actual payment that was made to the service provider. So if you received any maybe discounts or rebates, they're not to be included in the claim. It's the net cost. What was the final cost that you paid to the consultancy firm? So if your project is already complete and all expenditure is incurred, even to this point, if you complete your project, get your claim in as soon as possible. You don't necessarily need to wait until leave it for weeks. As soon as you're ready, if your project is complete, you're satisfied it's complete, work to get the claim into us. Okay, moving on to the final slide for me now is to note changes to your work plan. So, you applied a number of months ago. There may have been changes that needed to be undertaken. So just to note as well that if you are making any changes to your work plan, get in touch with us at retail@enterprise-ireland.com. So it's important to get any changes approved by us before you start to undertake any changes. So for example, where the maximum grant approved for your consultancy firm or your internal champion is potentially going to change, we cannot increase or reallocate between the two. So we can't approve any cost increases that are over and above what's in your letter of offer, and we can't reallocate between the two categories. So, but you may, for example, want to change your internal champion. Maybe it's a different person. Maybe the person that was named on the application form no longer works in the company, or you may have changed an external service provider or consultant. You can change those types of details. So if this is the case, you will need to outline those changes via email to us at retail@enterprise-ireland.com for our consideration and approval. And you need to give us the new name of your provider or champion and confirm that the work plan to be undertaken remains the same. Now, if it is the case that the work plan or what you applied for has substantially changed, please submit the updated plan for us before proceeding. So the key message here is you need our approval before proceeding, because we need to make sure then that all changes have been approved by us, so that at the claim stage then we were aware of the changes, and that at the claim stage then we won't have further questions. So all claims are vetted, so invoice, pay slips, proof of payment documentation, etc. We also undertake a technical review to ensure that the work undertaken described in the invoices and the progress report reflects the work plan that was applied for as well. And just to note as well that it's important that all this information is monitored. We're audited. We're safeguarding taxpayers' money. So just bear with us if it seems that some of this documentation requirements are onerous. There is a reason for that. But also the key message is we're here to help. So our retail@enterprise-ireland.com. If there's any changes to your work plan, any queries that crop up in relation to the claims process itself, Paul is going to give you more details on who to contact there. So that's it from me. I will now hand over to Paul, who'll give you a better understanding of how to navigate the grants claim process. And I'll keep an eye on questions that come in through the questions box. Thank you. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Terry, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar this morning. I've shut off my camera if that's okay, just to keep the speed of things flowing and make sure there's no interruption to our link. I'll probably spend the next 20 minutes or so just going through the claim process, what you'll need to know and to be aware of prior to submitting your claim. So we can go to the next slide there, please. Terry touched upon details around the letter of offer, so I'll just briefly mention this as part of my segment here. So it's the legal agreement between the company, which I'll be referring to as the grantee throughout the presentation, and Enterprise Ireland. This will contain all the terms and conditions of the grant. Most of you, I hope, have received at this stage your letter of offer, and that all of these issues, for those unfamiliar with it, will issue electronically through DocuSign. So what happens is the letter of offer is sent to the director of the company. Once that's received, it should be signed by 2 directors, or in the case where the company has 1 director. Where there are 2 directors, the director receiving it signs it first, and then it automatically transfers to the second director for he or she to sign. And the DocuSign acceptance, that has to be returned within 21 days. So just a quick recap on that little piece there to make sure you're familiar with it. And the next slide, please. Okay, we'll now go through the steps involved when it comes to making your claim. So as we've said, the grantee is the company named in the letter of offer, and that is yourselves. In terms of incurred expenditure, be mindful of these 2 dates, the 3rd of May, which is the approval start date, and the 17th of November, which will be your final claim date. This is for expenditure that is eligible or potentially eligible. All expenditure must be paid for by the grantee. So that's the number, that's the name and detail that will be on the application, letter of offer. They will be on the various documents such as bank statements that we'll be looking for. As Terry mentioned there earlier, if there is any change in terms of the fact that if your company is part of a group of companies or you're a sister company in a chain of businesses, that may alter, or we may see a different detail on documentation we receive, which we may not be aware of. So if there's anything like that, if you would make that known to the retail unit at the address that was provided earlier, I'll come back to that. It's just important at this juncture, maybe just to mention that. Only 1 grant claim is allowed. In previous schemes, it was possible to make 2 claims. However, for the 2023 scheme, you will only be able to make 1 claim, which will be your full and final claim. To access and download your claim form, we have created a link for you to do this, which is on your screen there. This is found on our Enterprise Ireland website in the section marked Online Retail Scheme. We will refer to the link here and throughout the presentation and at the end later on, just to make sure that you have that for yourselves. The following 3 emails will be important to note. So when you have any, if you're submitting your claims in the first instance, these all go through industry grant claims at enterprise-ireland.com. If you have, during the course of your claim processing, any queries or anything you wish to raise, we do have a general inquiries email for all grant offers. So for Online Retail Scheme, these queries can be directed to grant payment queries at enterprise-ireland.com. And again, as Terry mentioned, if there's any change in detail, whether it be with your training provider, or indeed if there was a change of Project Champion, which we'll discuss later on, if those details are a little bit different than what you had at the application stage, or they've changed or altered it for any reason along the way, this must be approved by the retail unit. And as Terry mentioned, they can be contacted on retail@enterpriseireland.com, and this should be done prior to submitting your claim. And if we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Anne-Marie. So at the point of making your claim and you have downloaded the documents that you'll need, the first thing to do is to take the time to go through your checklist. You'll find this on the first tab of your claim form. And just to let you know, when we process your claims, because we are dealing with a claim that covers both consultancy and your internal champion, our internal system here at Enterprise Ireland creates 2 what we call projects. So there will be a separate project reference for the consultancy and a separate project reference for the internal champion, for your project champion. This appears in the form of a 6-digit number with 2 letters, and these details will be found on Schedule A of your letter of offer. It would also be helpful to us if you are making any inquiries with relation to your claim to quote the appropriate project number in your email. So whether it's a query to do with the project champion or the consultancy, if you're making contact with us, it will be helpful to quote the correct reference number. So again, just to mention that. At this juncture, just to note that as you list the items of expenditure on your claim form, the actual costs are claimed exclusive of VAT. A reminder as well also that the expenditure is being claimed by your good selves in this, that is subject to a 50% grant rate. And this applies to both new applicants and the repeat applicants that were successful in this year's scheme. As your claim deals with both costs and expenditure for both the consulting and the project champion, one hard rule we have is that there is to be no reallocation of unused expenditure between these 2 categories. And what I'll do is in the next slide, I'll give you an example of this when discussing consultancy costs. Just as a note, when you submit your claim, you will be acknowledged by a dedicated payment officer assigned from our team to deal with your claim. This will be the person, this person will be your contact as you go forward. So there will be a point of contact, a name point of contact, which you will have regular interaction with for the purposes of processing your claim. And if you can take the next slide there, please. So I'll just do a run through here on what you need to know and understand when it comes to what is claimable for your service provider for your consultancy costs. Firstly, the maximum rate for consultants is 900 per day. So included in that rate will be all of the consultant's time working on your project, all the associated travel, out-of-pocket expenses, etc., all make up this rate of 900 per day. And just to note, 900 is the maximum rate. So for example, if your consultant charged you 700 per day, the 50% grant rate will apply to that 700 charge. So you might feel, well, I haven't claimed up to my 900, I'm entitled to claim further costs, and I can look for that perhaps on the champion's costs. I mentioned in the last slide that there can be no reallocation of unused expenditure. That can't be allowed. It's not allowed between the categories. So just to note that when you're making claims on both consultancy and project champion. Also in relation to consultancy, the consultancy firms and how many can be used. In relation to the costs, you may use more than one consulting firm for the project. If you're working with a firm of consultants and where more than one consultant is being used from the same firm, the total maximum rate of 900 per day will apply to that firm. In terms of itemizing the level of work that the consultant has done for you, that consultant's invoice must include the number of days worked and the rate per day charged. This will be important as this will be checked, verified by our retail unit colleagues so that it can be put through to ourselves for further processing. For ourselves on the grant payments team, when reviewing the submitted documentation, we will be looking for a copy invoice and grantee bank statement showing proof of payment. And that's to show proof of payment for the consultancy work that was undertaken. Just a little bit on the bank statement details. This must show the grantee name and account number. And in terms of what we can or can't receive, we do accept online bank payment documents. However, we will also ask for a copy bank statement. The reason we'll ask for this is because not all online bank payment types show all the required information that we'd be looking for. Again, this is important so that we can verify the grantee name, bank account number, and all of the details that correspond with everything on all other documentation to ensure that this is eligible and correct. And if we have the next slide there, please, Anne-Marie. So a little here with regard to your project champion. Only one project champion is eligible. You will have a named internal champion and you'll be claiming for the work undertaken by that project champion. The maximum salary that can be claimed for the project champion is 200 per day over the duration of the project, or whatever was applied for in your letter of offer. Now, how we calculate and how you should calculate for the purpose of your claim is where we take the gross salary, divide this by 232 days, which will be equal to the maximum daily rate or 200 per day, whichever is the lesser. The magic number of 232, this comes from in a given year, we take out all of the weekends, bank holidays, and the number of working days we use is 232. Ensure the date and daily activity undertaken by the project champion is listed on the claim form. So completing the section of the claim form for your project champion, you'll see lines of entry where will ask you to include dates of work, activity, and a description of what that work was. I would say 1 or 2 lines would suffice, so there's no need to try and cram in an awful lot of detail here. So a 1 or 2 liner to describe the activity will work here well on the claim form when you're completing it. Just a further word in relation to project champions who I appreciate some of them on the call may have project champions that are working part-time. If this is the case for those of you on the call, please state that this will be calculated slightly different. So to calculate for part-time internal champions, you'll be taking the gross salary, you'll divide this by the actual number of working days, which will give you the maximum daily rate of 200 or whichever is the lesser. And we go to the next slide, please, Anne-Marie. So between the dates of the 3rd of May and the 17th of November, we will be looking for payslips and proof of payment that fall within the claim period. The bank statement must show the grantee name and account number. Also, the bank statement you submit, if it shows a large number of transactions, we would appreciate if you actually highlight where these payments are. Or alternatively, what you can do is if you're sending in a full statement and you're trying to highlight or visual, it just shows where the payment we need to check is, you can black out other transactions as well. We have in the past received statements where it takes time for the payment officer to go through it line by line. So it is really very helpful for us if you can highlight that specifically on the bank statement that you submit. If your employee is listed in a batch payment, if you can highlight the project salary or their weekly, fortnightly, or monthly salary and redact all other information, this will be helpful to us. We will look for the payroll listings. So if you can send the payroll listing with your batch payment, that is what we will be checking to ensure that the information required to be verified is correct. It's also important to highlight at this juncture that the total project champion costs cannot exceed cumulative total consulting costs at claim stage. So just in terms of where you can find this information, as Terry mentioned earlier on, this has been recorded, so it's going to be available on our website together with these slides. And also we have, as I said earlier on, created a link where you can download all of this information for what you need to do. We've created links so that can happen, but further information is available on the online retail scheme tab that is on the website. And can I just draw your attention? I know Terry said it as well, but again, because there has been a change of final claim date, this will now be Friday, the 17th of November. So as Terry said, if you can, and if your work is completed, you can get that into us before that date. Preferably, if you can get in before, that's fine. But just to be aware that that is the final claim date. I've just put back up there the information links that you have, along with the link that's going to be important for you to download your documents. And just before I finish up and join Terry for questions and answers that you may have, just a couple of takeaways if I can, just really in advance of making your claim, take a run through your checklist, make sure that you've all the required documentation, that everything will be submitted in the grantee name and address of the company, and these same details will appear on your bank statements. We will look for the pay slips for project champion, bank statements, and invoices with regard to the consultancy work. Ensure that the expenditure that you are claiming for falls within the approved start date of 3rd of May and the final claim date of 4th November. So anything you're claiming for that falls outside these dates will be disallowed. So just to be mindful of that time frame period and for all expenditure to be checked and verified. Those are the two important dates that we'll be focusing on. So I'll leave it there for the moment, but happy to take any questions that may have come in there. Terry, if I can hand back to you.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Can you hear me there okay?
I can indeed, yeah.
Great, yeah. There's a few queries coming through on the final claim date. So just to re-stress, the final claim date has been extended to the 17th of November, 2023. So just to kind of re-emphasize that, I know a few people have asked, is there exception to this? Like that is the extension. We do need to have the claims paid by the end of the year. So in order to, we've got a high volume of claims in order to get them processed and paid by the end of the year, we need to stipulate this final claim date. So just to reiterate that, there was someone was looking as well for the emails. So this recording, as Paul was saying, will be available. So that there's different emails there that you know, there's the retail@enterprise-ireland.com, which is our central email. If there's any queries, so for example, changes to the work plan, etc., we can deal with those. If there's any queries in relation to the grant claim process itself, in terms of documentation, etc., those queries go to the grant payments.
That's it,
yeah. So that's Paul, can you call it out there, please?
Yeah, I think it's industry grant claims. Thanks there, Anne-Marie. I think we're going back to it. So the queries can be it's grant payments queries at enterprise-ireland.com. I think it's back up on screen there for people to see. So when claims are submitted, it's the industry grant claims at enterprise-ireland.com. And during the course of processing that claim, if you have queries, please send them to grantpaymentsqueries@enterprise-ireland.com. And as Terry said, any changes or amendments to the work plan, or if there's anything you're unsure of that you need to contact my colleagues with, the email there is retail@enterprise-ireland.com.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, I know there's a lot of email addresses there. So the simple way of describing it is, if there's changes to your work plan, etc., send your email to retail@enterprise-ireland.com, or just kind of general queries. If it's claim specific queries, say on the claim documentation, what do I need to submit, that kind of question, at the pre-claim submission stage, it's grant payment queries at enterprise-ireland.com. And then when you're submitting the final claim, and the claim must be submitted by a company representative from the actual company itself, not by the service provider, etc., has to come from the recipient of the grant. And that submission is to industry grant claims at enterprise-ireland.com. And at the end of the day, listen, if query comes in, it'll go to the right person. And for example, if they send it into retail and it should have gone into the other addresses, we can sort that out. So just to flag that as well. There were some queries as well, questions around the email address, so that's been dealt with there. A question then on a consultant, so for example, if there was one consultant in the application form and they wanted now to include a second consultant, that falls into the category of change to the work plan. So Karen, I think, was asking that question. So it's just to submit to retail@enterprise-ireland.com if there's a change to the work plan, so that would fall into the category of change to the work plan, Karen. So send us an email just to clarify the details there, and we're happy to pick up with you after the session. Brendan has a question then on the info required, etc., at the claim stage. So again, you need to go into the grant claims link that details everything. So that claims link is really, really important, because that is going to show you the different documentation that is required. So it's all detailed there, Brendan. So I'd advise you to have a good read of the letter of offer. And then if you have any questions at that stage, get your emails into the grant payment queries email address. Sarah hasn't started the project yet. Even a short time. Yeah, no, we understand that, Sarah. But just to flag, we've had a few queries on this. Even if your project isn't completed by the 17th of November, whatever costs have been incurred are claimable, to that point. you know, it's not that you have to have everything done to submit a claim. You know, whatever costs have been incurred and paid for to that point can be submitted. And I know, you know, some companies may have started back on the 3rd of May, others may have waited. So just, you know, just to note that, you know, even if you haven't fully completed the project by the final claim date, it's not just the project is completed, the costs are incurred, evidence of same, and the full claim documentation is in by the 17th of November. When will the grant amounts be paid to the claimant? So, you know, so as I said, that's the final claim date. But, you know, a company that's complete and costs incurred can, you know, they could get their claim in now if they are complete and costs fully incurred. And then, you know, we go through a process. So once the full claim is in, it could take a couple of weeks, I think, to get paid. So, you know, I think the trick is as well, if you are complete and costs incurred, you know, and you're satisfied that your project is complete and costs are fully incurred, I'll get your claim in as soon as possible so that you're not caught at the final claim date when a lot of the volumes will be coming through.
Just to also say at that point, if I can, Terry, as well, that we'll endeavour to get all payments out by the end of the year. The final claim date has pushed on, so it's just important that when your claim comes in, that you have all your claim information correct. We will check and process it and come back to you if there's anything further that we need, which comes back to the payment officer assigned to you. So you'll have that interaction. But for anyone on the call who's wondering, well, from the time I get my claim in and everything is processed and it's been received, how long will I have to wait? So we will endeavour to get all payments out by the end of the year. There may be a couple for whatever reason that fall into early next year, but our ambition is to make sure that all payments are paid by the end of this year.
Yeah, and just on that point there, Paul, you know, sometimes claims payments can get delayed if we're waiting for other information from you. So, for example, if tax clearance isn't in order, you know, sometimes that can delay the payment. So the payment delay might not necessarily be an Enterprise Ireland issue. It could be a challenge that maybe there's an additional piece of information that's required from you. So if you are asked for anything or if there's anything missing, you'll be notified and, you know, work with us. You know, we're really keen to get this money out before the end of the year to get you paid. So, you know, I think that sometimes any kind of delay to tax clearance is one that can often cause delays. So just to make sure that that's in order. So, you know, can't reiterate the importance of familiarising yourself with the grant claim documentation and a good read at the letter of offer as well. There's a couple of questions in there around if a claim is made to a parent company, but the champion is paid to an associated company. Yeah, so you kind of have a situation where there's a group. So in the application, a particular company would have been named on the application. And our understanding would have been that the internal champion is a direct employee of that company. Now, if it transpires that there's a change or something we need to be aware of, that, you know, for example, maybe a different company in the group is paying the champion, or the champion actually is on the payroll of a separate company in the group, send us an email to notify us. So I think that type of information would need to come to us to retail@enterprise-ireland.com in an email. And we can, you know, as soon as if you're aware of it now, that will be the case at the claim stage, let us know. We would share that with the grants team. So just to like, that's okay as long as we're told and we're given the details. I think another important point as well on that is, you know, the entity that gets the grant, the legal entity, for us, they're the entity that should be paying the invoices. If it transpires that it's a different entity in the group that's paying the invoices, again, we just need to be notified of that, that is the case. So, but it would need to be within the legal group. The work does not all have to be done. I think there's a lot of similar questions around, you know, ideally the project is complete and full claim in by 17th of November. But if it transpires that, you know, there's more work to be done, it's not complete, submit the claim for what is complete to that point. It's a one claim process, but, you know, as I said earlier on, it's not a case of it's an all or nothing. If there is some work done, eligible costs incurred at that point, you can submit a claim. The facility to submit additional documentation disallowed from not having the correct info. Paul, you maybe answered this question. So a question around if there's information missing from the claim, that all, you know, and so put it this way, there's documentation submitted by the 17th of November, but some information, additional documentation was missing, or etc. Not all correct information is there. My understanding is we would give a bit of allowance to listen. If there's something missing, we will let you know when you get it into us.
That's it. Will have dedicated payment officers once your claim is acknowledged by that payment officer. That's really be dealing with going forward. So in the first instance, we look at the initial documentation that's received, and in that first review, you'll be contacted immediately if something is missing. It's very helpful if you let us know that you've discovered you haven't sent in something, or that something is missing later on. You can have that interaction with that payment officer. If you let us know as soon as possible, that's great. So we can just address that to make sure turnaround time is not affected for you. The other thing I just would like to stress is that in order to make sure you have everything, take a little bit of time out to go through your checklist and list everything, and that you check everything there that you need to have. There may be a reason why you can't produce a document straight away, but it's ideal that at the time of submitting your claim that you have all the required documentation ready. But do take time out to run through your checklist, and that way you can ensure that there's no fall down, and that to the best of your ability you have everything submitted. If it turns out something is missing, or you realize that you haven't included something, you can get back to us. If it's done as soon as possible, we can deal with that directly.
Great. There's another question here about what is meant by the 50% grant rate. So that means basically that, you submit your claim, your costs that you're incurred, you have to, incur the cost, pay your service provider. The internal champion would have been paid through their salary, for example, and you get half of the money back. So say you submit a claim for, say you were approved 50,000 and you did the project according to plan, everything was done accordingly, etc. Your grant rate was 50%. So your cost would be 50,000. Your grant rate was 50%. Then the grant that you're paid is half of the total cost. So that's what 50% grant rate means, that you get half the money back, but provided that everything was in order, it was eligible costs, etc. So that's a very simple way to describe it, that you're getting half of the cost that you incurred, eligible costs and payments, payback. Is that okay? There is another question there, but I'll probably go back to the person directly on it. It's quite a specific question. So I'll go through them again. If I think there's any that are quite maybe more specific that I haven't covered off here in the general, like a lot of people have similar questions, I will go back to you directly if I think your question is quite specific. But just to remember our general, like if there's any kind of general questions, even from this webinar, email us at retail@enterprise-ireland.com, and just to keep it simple. Great. I don't think there's any more questions there, Paul.
Okay.
I think that's everything.
And as you said, Terry, anything as
a
result of today's webinar, this can be played back if anything was missed. But do reach out to us. Particularly post-claim stage, you can reach out to myself, or you will, as I say, have a dedicated payment officer working with you during the review and process of your claim. So at all stages, we'll be able to deal directly with you. So in case you missed anything, or you're still unsure of something, no problem, no harm. It's easy. Reach out to us. We'll be on hand to assist you in any way we can. Yeah,
and just one other point as well. I mean, I'm conscious of certain people on the call here from the company on this webinar, that even if their accountant or their financial controller or somebody else that will actually be looking after the claim, it's probably worth printing out the DocuSign version of the letter of offer, making sure they get to see that, they get, that if they're not available today, they can view this recording as well, give them a copy of that letter of offer as well. So it's just some practicalities around, making sure that the people who need to know all the information are getting access to it as well. Great. So that's it for me. I think that concludes the webinar. So listen, thank you everyone for joining, and best of luck with your projects. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.